For years, I heard nothing from her. The alien who guarded the secrets of the universe in her silence could, with a single word, unravel all the patience I had stored in a lifetime. The hum of the station was constant, a low vibration that seemed to seep into every corner of the metal corridors, settling in the joints of the walls and the soles of his boots. He had always thought it comforting, like the heartbeat of a mechanical giant, though after months of sharing it with her, he sometimes wondered if she felt the same. The alien woman sat by the observation deck, legs crossed in a posture so deliberate it seemed ceremonial, her silver hair catching the cold light of distant stars and refracting it into thin threads of luminescence. Her ears, long and delicate, curved with an elegance no human fashion could imitate, and occasionally she flicked the tips in ways that suggested she was listening to frequencies invisible to him. She had been silent for years, her thoughts locked behind a calm, enigmatic face that seemed almost impervious to human frustration. He, on the other hand, had run through every possible strategy for coaxing her voice out: friendly chatter, scientific debate, and a frankly embarrassing number of poorly timed jokes. Today's attempt involved a small, robotic teapot he had programmed to pour liquid with perfect precision. He had programmed it, in theory, to serve tea to her exactly at the moment she reached for it, as though the universe itself had conspired to anticipate her needs. In practice, it shot a thin arc of steaming tea straight onto his boots the first time it tried to measure her hand's trajectory. He looked down at the damp metal of his boot, muttering something about predictive algorithms being more like predictive mischief, and caught her gaze. Her eyes, deep violet and impossibly calm, regarded him with an inscrutable patience that simultaneously frustrated and humored him. He swore he saw the faintest twitch in the corner of her mouth, a signal she was amused by the tea assault, though she didn't speak. That was progress, he decided. He had learned to find humor in these small failures, the ones that would have driven him to despair on any other station. Like the time he tried to teach her human card games, imagining that the concept of bluffing might appeal to her analytical mind. He shuffled the deck with exaggerated flair, dropping cards on the floor with a loud slap that echoed down the hall, and she merely stared at him, tilting her head, before delicately picking up the cards with fingers so long they made a human hand look clumsy. She didn't play, but she did rearrange the cards into a pattern that later, he realized, resembled a map of the local asteroid cluster. She didn't explain it, of course. She never explained anything. And yet, the humor in the absurdity of the attempt, the way he had treated a sophisticated alien mind as if it were a novice human acquaintance, kept him going. The station itself was a mixture of gleaming chrome and soft bioluminescent panels, designed to be efficient and breathable for multiple species. He often joked aloud to the empty corridors that the engineers had clearly prioritized form over human comfort, citing the thin, uncomfortable chairs and walls that were somehow too smooth to lean against without sliding slightly. She would watch these moments quietly, sometimes responding with a small tilt of the head or a barely perceptible flick of her fingers across a holographic interface, as if to say, "Yes, your human frustrations amuse me." He suspected she had developed her own private amusement routines. Once, he found a small, delicate sculpture of him in the supply room, meticulously constructed from discarded nanofiber filaments, showing him slipping on a floor panel while holding a wrench. He laughed aloud and left it where she could see him discovering it. That night, her soft exhale, almost like a sigh, seemed to echo faint approval. Even in the humdrum of daily tasks, recalibrating the station's solar arrays, running diagnostic sweeps, cleaning the shared living quarters, there was a rhythm to their coexistence. He spoke, she listened. He asked questions, she tilted her head. When he dropped a tool, she sometimes flicked it back toward him with an elegance that made him stumble but always laughed despite himself. The humor was their bridge, small and fragile, but persistent. He imagined that if someone watched from the observation deck above, they would see a human man, utterly exasperated, and an alien woman, serene and composed, navigating the microgravity world together like dancers in a slow, complicated waltz. And there were nights when the station drifted through the void, far from any human colony, and he found himself talking to her about trivial things. Earth's weather, the taste of chocolate, his favorite science fiction shows, even though he knew she might never answer. Sometimes, he suspected, the humor of his own voice, the ridiculous human habit of needing conversation, was enough to make her presence feel less distant. Once he joked about teaching her to laugh at human puns, demonstrating the classic, "Why did the photon refuse to check a bag?" Set up, and she tilted her head slowly, considering, before tapping her fingers on the console in a rhythm that somehow resembled applause. It wasn't a laugh, but it was acknowledgement. In those moments, he realized that silence didn't always signify absence. Sometimes, it was a different language entirely, one measured in gestures, in the tilt of an ear, in shared glances across the glowing panels of the station. And as he sat by the observation deck that evening, watching the alien woman trace an invisible line among the stars with a delicate fingertip, he felt a flicker of something he had not dared to name. A quiet hope that, maybe, in the tapestry of humor, patience, and unspoken connection, there would come a day when the first word would finally emerge. Until then, he would keep spilling tea on his boots, dropping cards, and making jokes that only she could truly appreciate, finding joy in the strange, luminous patience of the alien woman who shared the endless void with him. The corridor lights flickered briefly, a minor glitch in the station's otherwise impeccable systems, and he cursed softly, already anticipating the minor chaos that would follow. The alien woman was floating nearby, her long silver hair drifting like a river of mercury in zero gravity, ears twitching slightly as if to catch the faintest hum of the failing lights. She observed him with those deep violet eyes, unblinking, serene, as though the entire human panic over a flickering light was an entertaining display rather than a genuine concern. He waved a hand at her, a mock salute of despair, and muttered, "Don't just float there like you're above it all. Someone has to deal with the mess." She responded with nothing more than a slow tilt of her head, but the curve of her lips betrayed a hint of amusement that made him feel both foolish and relieved. The problem, of course, wasn't just the lights. A maintenance bot had been tasked with recalibrating the gravity modulators in this section, and it had developed a kind of stubborn self-awareness. It refused to obey simple commands, spinning wildly through the air like a metallic dervish, knocking over a stack of diagnostic pads, and causing him to flail in a very human display of frustration. He lunged after it with a combination of grace and panic that would have been comical had anyone outside the station been watching. She floated calmly near the wall, arms folded, silently judging his lack of poise. When he collided with the bot and tumbled into the wall, she let out a sound, a soft, musical chime that was unmistakably amusement. Not laughter, exactly, but closer to the human sense of chuckling at absurdity. He rolled onto his back and glared at her, only half serious. "You know, in some cultures, this is considered a heroic struggle," he said, shaking his head. She raised one eyebrow, or the alien equivalent, and tapped the bot with a fingertip, sending it spinning neatly back into its charging dock. The station itself seemed to pulse around them, lights and panels flickering with the cadence of a living organism. Tiny drones floated past, monitoring systems, and occasionally projecting holographic schematics into the air. He pointed at one, and it startled him by projecting a three-dimensional rendition of the entire station with himself marked in red as the principal hazard. She tilted her head, observing the display with a slow, deliberate curiosity. He sighed. "I swear someday I'll be famous on Earth as the man who got outwitted by a floating alien and some overzealous AI." The corners of her mouth twitched upward slightly, the kind of subtle humor that humans rarely achieved without words, yet somehow it carried weight. Lunch was another arena for small disasters. He had attempted to make a sandwich, carefully layering protein packs and hydrogel condiments in a way he thought was efficient, when a microgravity mishap sent a slice of bread tumbling across the room and sticking to one of the observation deck windows. She observed quietly, eyes following the airborne bread with precision, and then, in a move that seemed both elegant and mischievous, flicked her fingers toward the bread. It hovered midair for a moment before spinning gently and landing perfectly back on the plate. He stared at her. "That's cheating," he said, shaking his head. She didn't respond, but her slight smirk was enough to make him laugh, conceding defeat. Evenings were the oddest mix of wonder and absurdity. He had rigged a small projector to simulate Earth sunsets, projecting vibrant oranges and purples across the station walls. She floated beside him, tracing imaginary lines in the air, occasionally tapping on the projection and making stars twinkle in patterns he didn't understand. Once he joked aloud, "I think the stars are conspiring against me," pointing at a cluster that suddenly blinked in a mock Morse code pattern. She reached out and, with a flick of her fingers, rearranged the blinking lights so they spelled a pattern resembling a small, smiley face. He stared. "That's incredibly patronizing," he said, though he couldn't suppress a grin. Her lips twitched just barely, but enough to let him know she found it entertaining. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night cycle, he would float near her and attempt conversation, speaking softly to fill the silence of the compartment. He asked about trivial things. Did she prefer simulated Earth rain or the sound of distant pulsars? Did she think the station's AI had any real sense of humor? She would tilt her head, occasionally tapping her fingers on a console to indicate a response, but her silence remained a constant, a gentle reminder that she existed on a rhythm different from his own. He had learned to read the subtleties, the twitch of an ear, the curve of a lip, the way her gaze lingered on certain lights or shadows. In her quiet, he discovered an entire vocabulary of gestures that conveyed amusement, curiosity, and sometimes approval. Later, a micrometeor shower caused the observation deck to shimmer with cascading light. He floated to the glass, pointing out a streak of fire across the void. "Look, you can almost imagine someone's writing a note with that," he said, stretching his imagination as far as the stars themselves. She mirrored his gesture, pointing her elongated fingers at the same streak, and for a fleeting moment, he felt as if the station had become a stage for silent communication. Humor, he realized, was embedded in the fabric of their shared days. The small gestures, the mishaps, the playful corrections of his human clumsiness. It was the glue that kept patience alive, the gentle spark that made silence less imposing. By the time the station's artificial night cycle deepened, they were both floating near the observation deck, her eyes reflecting the scattered starlight, his own gaze tracing the luminous patterns she had traced in the air. He laughed quietly to himself, imagining the reports Earthbound scientists would write. Human crew member survives alien silence via humor, tea, and gravity-defying bread. She tilted her head, ears twitching, as if agreeing silently, and he felt a strange comfort. In the chaos, in the glitches, in the absurdity of shared existence, they had formed a rhythm, a delicate understanding, a quiet partnership forged through laughter, patience, and a galaxy of small, unpredictable miracles. He awoke to the faint buzz of the station's automated systems cycling through the morning routines, a sound so rhythmic it felt almost musical. The alien woman was already awake, her long, elven-style ears catching the vibrations in a way he couldn't fully comprehend. She floated near the viewport, hair fanning like silver silk in the microgravity, eyes fixed on a distant nebula that painted the void in violet and cerulean streaks. He watched her for a moment, a private amusement bubbling in his chest before muttering, "You know, I'm fairly certain you're plotting how to humiliate me again." She tilted her head slightly, an eyebrow or what he guessed was her equivalent, raising in a manner that conveyed neither denial nor affirmation, but the barest hint of playfulness. Breakfast was always a precarious affair. Today he had decided to experiment with a space omelet, a concoction of protein gels, hydro vegetables, and artificially cultured eggs. He tried to flip it midair to save a minute of prep time, but it veered sharply, smearing across the transparent wall of the galley. She drifted toward him, eyes tracking the airborne food with calm precision, and then reached out. The omelet reassembled itself neatly on the plate with an almost imperceptible shimmer, as though guided by her subtle manipulation of microgravity fields. He blinked. "Are you cheating with anti-gravity? Or is that just your alien way of saying, really, human again?" Her lips curved almost imperceptibly, a ghost of a smile, and she flicked her ears, a gesture that he decided must be the alien equivalent of a chuckle. By mid-morning, they had settled into the maintenance bay, checking the station's external shielding panels. A recent meteor sweep had left tiny microdents, cosmetic but potentially irritating over time. He carried the toolkit, floating awkwardly with tether lines trailing behind him, while she glided with the precision of someone whose body had been designed to navigate 3 dimensions effortlessly. When he tripped on a stray cable, she reached out, catching him mid-fall. He dangled in the air like a hapless puppet, looking at her with mock exasperation. "I swear you could teach classes in human embarrassment." She didn't respond verbally, but a faint musical tone emitted from her throat, or something close enough that it sounded like laughter, and he decided that, yes, she was definitely amused. The station's AI piped in with its usual monotone commentary. "Warning, human behavior detected. Probability of imminent chaos, 92%. He glanced at her. "See, even the AI knows it." She merely observed the holographic display projected from the console, and for a brief moment, he imagined her calculating the odds of his survival with the exactitude of a quantum computer, deciding that the best course of action was to intervene only when the entertainment value outweighed the risk. Later, in the common module, he attempted to teach her a simple human game, a version of chess adapted for holographic manipulation. He explained the rules carefully, moving pieces with exaggerated motions as though the spectacle itself might compel her participation. She watched, silent, her long fingers occasionally tracing abstract patterns in the air that seemed to distort the holograms subtly. He toppled his own queen accidentally and exclaimed, "Oh no, the king demands vengeance." She tilted her head, and the holographic board rearranged itself so that his remaining pieces formed an elaborate smiley face. He groaned dramatically, flopping back into a floating chair. "I give up. You're impossible." She didn't answer, but her slight ear twitch confirmed that, yes, she was savoring his defeat. In the observation deck, they shared a quieter moment. He had rigged a small projector to simulate Earth's oceans, letting ripples of holographic water cascade across the walls and floor. She floated nearby, tracing delicate patterns in the light with her fingertips, each motion causing the simulated water to ripple in ways he couldn't predict. Humor bubbled in his chest again. "I think the sea is trying to tell me something, it says. Stop flailing, human." She tilted her head, eyes glinting, and flicked her ears, a gesture that made him imagine the water itself was giggling. The absurdity of it, the stillness of her composed presence, the chaos of his clumsy attempts at humor, the playful manipulation of alien physics, kept the tension light, almost musical. A sudden alert caused both of them to float toward the external monitoring array. A small cluster of micrometeoroids was approaching, too small to breach the station, but large enough to make the AI nervous. He pointed at the cluster and joked, "Do you think they'll forgive me if I wave at them?" She observed quietly, then with a subtle gesture sent a controlled pulse from the station's magnetic deflection system. The meteoroids diverted just enough to miss, and he clapped his hands in mock triumph. "See, nothing can touch me while you're around. Well, except maybe my ego." Her lips twitched, ears flicking, and he was certain she had found his self-congratulation amusing. By evening, the station drifted through a cloud of faintly glowing cosmic dust, painting the viewport with a surreal iridescence. He floated next to her, silently enjoying the spectacle, and dared a small question. "Do you ever get bored of staring at stars? Or is the void fascinating enough to keep you entertained?" She reached out, her finger tracing a delicate line through the dust, causing particles to shimmer in arcs. It wasn't an answer in words, but the movement felt deliberate, almost playful, as though she were responding in a language of gestures and light. He chuckled, realizing that the absurdity of trying to communicate across species had become its own kind of humor, a shared joke with invisible punchlines. Later, as the artificial night cycle deepened, he floated near the observation deck window. The alien woman leaned beside him, hair drifting like silver flame, ears twitching faintly with some imperceptible excitement. He imagined her thoughts were distant, analytical, and perhaps entirely amused by the human's endless attempts at wit. He whispered softly, half to himself and half to her, "You know, one day, all this silliness might actually work. You might actually talk to me." She didn't answer, of course, but the faint musical hum she emitted felt almost like agreement, like a soft punctuation to the day's chaos. And in that quiet companionship, floating through cosmic dust and subtle humor, he felt the strange thrill of knowing that patience, laughter, and the occasional floating omelet might one day break the long, serene silence of the alien woman beside him. The station's lights dimmed into the soft gold of the artificial dusk cycle, the hum of machinery, a gentle lull in the background. He floated toward the observation deck, tether lines coiling lazily behind him, and found the alien woman already there, her silver hair drifting like liquid starlight, ears brushing faintly against the gentle currents of air. She was silent, as always, but tonight there was a subtle shift in the way she held herself, a slight tilt of the head that hinted at curiosity rather than distance. He approached carefully, not wanting to disturb the fragile tension that had begun to thrum between them over countless months of quiet companionship, botched jokes, and shared disasters. He held out a small tray with 2 cups of steaming liquid, a blend of Earth-style tea and hydronutrients he had been tinkering with for weeks. When the first attempt spilled in a microgravity misfire, she only tilted her head and flicked a finger, sending the liquid floating in a delicate arc back into the cups. He stared at her in awe. "You know, if I had a medal for every time you've saved my dignity, I'd be wearing it upside down." Her ears twitched faintly, the only acknowledgement he received, yet it felt like a triumph of understanding. They drifted together to the center of the observation deck, where the view of the cosmos stretched in an endless curtain of stars and swirling nebulae. He had arranged a projection system to overlay constellations familiar from Earth, hoping to share a fragment of his world with her. As he gestured to Orion, explaining its mythology in a mix of fact, embellishment, and exaggeration, she followed his gestures with an elegance that made him laugh. "Honestly," he said, "if you ever decide to start storytelling yourself, humans won't stand a chance. You'd have them hypnotized with a single finger wave." She remained silent, but the way the projection rippled beneath her fingertips suggested amusement. A sudden ping from the station's monitoring array drew their attention to a minor meteor cluster drifting nearby. In his usual dramatic fashion, he waved at the cluster. "Hello!" Friendly greetings from the human contingent. She drifted closer, fingers extended, and with a subtle gesture, rerouted the micrometeors just enough to avoid a collision with the outer hull. He laughed, clapping his hands together. "Perfect. You know, someday historians will write about this. Human survives by charm and alien precision." Her lips curved ever so slightly, ears flicking, and he realized he could interpret these small movements now as expressions, subtle but deliberate, bridging the silence that had once felt so absolute. Later, as they floated side by side, he dared a quiet question, one he had rehearsed countless times in private but never voiced aloud. "Do you ever think about speaking, about saying something to me?" The air seemed to hold its breath. She turned her head slowly, gaze locking with his in a way that made his chest tighten. And then, in a voice soft, musical, and startlingly human in tone, she said a single word. "Finally." The sound reverberated through the compartment, a thread of vibration that felt almost sacred. He stared, unable at first to process the weight of it. "Finally," he repeated, half in disbelief, half in awe. She nodded ever so slightly, ears twitching in a gesture of acknowledgement. The humor of months of misadventures, the spilled tea, the flailing tools, the floating omelets, and his endless human clumsiness, culminated in that moment of connection, and he realized that all the small absurdities had been the scaffold for this breakthrough. Over the following hours, words flowed cautiously, but steadily. She described constellations unknown to human astronomers, her language intertwining scientific precision with delicate poetry. He shared human stories, legends, jokes, and embarrassing personal anecdotes. And for the first time, their exchanges became a genuine conversation rather than a dance of gestures and guesses. Each laugh, each surprised interjection, reinforced the bridge they had built, and he marveled at how patience, humor, and small acts of empathy had finally unlocked her voice. By the time the station's artificial night deepened, he sat beside her, tethered gently to prevent floating away. The stars beyond the viewport shimmered like scattered gemstones, and she leaned slightly toward him, hair drifting in the silent currents. "I never realized," he said softly, "that silence could be so communicative. I thought I was just talking to myself half the time." She smiled faintly, ears twitching, and reached out to trace the faint projection of the Milky Way with him. He reflected on the months behind them, the failures, the chaos, the humor, the patience. He had grown in ways subtle yet profound. His capacity for empathy had stretched beyond human comprehension, his resilience had strengthened, and his understanding of communication had evolved to include gestures, glances, and even silence as equally potent as words. She, in turn, had allowed herself to trust, to reveal the first glimpses of her inner world, and to engage with a species so different yet so persistent in its humor and folly. As the stars wheeled above and the station floated silently through the void, he realized that the bridge they had built was more than words. It was shared experience, humor, patience, and the willingness to embrace the absurdities of life together. He laughed softly to himself, imagining Earth historians again, and she tilted her head, lips twitching faintly, ears flicking, confirmation that she understood. In that quiet, suspended moment, their lives intertwined across the gulf of species, space, and silence, and the human man knew that the long wait, the endless small absurdities, had led to something profoundly, luminously real. They had crossed the final divide, not with force or science alone, but with humor, empathy, and the quiet courage to remain present until the universe itself seemed to nod in approval. The silence that had once defined her presence had been replaced by conversation, laughter, and subtle gestures of connection. And he, for the first time, understood that bridging the vast unknown between worlds was not only possible, it could be delightful, absurd, and quietly magnificent all at once.